it happened when Zia Yusuf came in suddenly out of nowhere. This man came in with his £200,000 and he bought the position of chairman. Nigel Farage and I we're friends, or we're probably not now. I got this text from Richard Tice, who said, Howard, we're not happy you talking about supporting Tommy Robinson. If you continue to do so, you're going to be expelled.
Hello and welcome to the Resistance GB podcast. My name's Emma Dunwell and today I'm joined by Howard Cox from Fairfield UK, former Reform mayoral candidate for London. So how are you today, and would you just like to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, hello, and thank you for having me, to be interviewed. I'm very, very, very honoured. Who I am? Well, it's a bit of a long while. I've been around a long time, but for the last 15 years, I've been running a campaign, as you said, Fairfield UK. We managed to get fuel duty frozen in that time for 15 years. It's the longest of any levy in this history of customs and excise that has been frozen that long. In fact, it went down 10%, thanks to Rishi Sunak. He actually knocked it down by 5p during the COVID lockdown. And I also, because of that, I got to know people like Richard Tice, Richard Tice, bless his cotton socks, was leader of the Reform UK party. And he asked me, because of what I was doing with regard to the motorist, to stand as London mayor. And the reason why he wanted that is because Sadiq Khan was going to introduce, or it has already introduced, the ULEZ expansion. So it fitted in quite nicely. And I have 1.7 million sign-ups to Fairfield UK. So that was a bit of an attraction to Reform as well, I think. And I didn't do that well. I came fifth out of about 14 candidates, but I got 3% of the vote. But let's not forget, Sadiq Khan only got 18%. That means 82% didn't vote for him. But that's another matter. That's a personal vendetta on my part. But it was an incredible experience to stand there. But then Nigel asked me to stand down in the front line of immigration, Nigel Farage, namely Dover and Deal, and I stood as down there as to try and get the MP spot there, and Sunak suddenly threw at us to try to wrong foot Reform an early election, and we only had 3.5 weeks to campaign. I came second. I got 24% of the vote, and if I'd another 3 or 4 weeks, I think I would have nicked it, because the Labour guy had been campaigning for nearly 2.5 years. So anyway, that's history now. But I'm not really a politician. I'm sorry, I'm too honest to be a politician. and from my point of view, Fairfield UK is still very much my core work at the moment, but as my wife says, I should be tending my petunias now at my tender years.
So what originally led you to join Reform?
Yeah, it took a lot, because I appeared a lot on Talk Radio, Talk TV, when Richard Tice had his own show on every Sunday morning, and I was sort of the person that comes along to talk about political issues affecting motorists, and I had a half-hour spot on his show regularly, and I got to know him. And after about 8 or 9 Sundays, he suddenly said to me, Howard, let's have a coffee afterwards. I said, oh yeah, I'd love to, Richard, that's very kind of you. And he sat down and said, how would you like to stand for London Mayor for Reform? And I immediately said no. And it took me 2 to 3 months to recognise the fact is people were saying, look, you could do this on the basis that we had to stop the ULEZ expansion, the dishonest cash-grabbing tax that Sadiq Khan was inflicting on motorists in London. That's a whole nother interview we could talk about. But and I like Richard. Yeah. Richard and I got on well. I'm a Thatcherite by history. I'm a conservative. I'm also one of these people that voted to go into the common market in 1973. That's how far I'm talking about. But it was a common market, not going to be a thing that's going to dictate all our lives in every aspect of our lives, particularly in human rights and things. So I go back a long way. I have a lot of experience. I think Richard saw that as a good advantage. And so after 2 to 3 months, I said, yes, I'll do it. And sadly, I wasn't supported that well by Reform in London, partly because there's no money. And the other thing also, it's very important to understand, Richard was the leader and there's no sign of Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
Nigel only came out of the woodwork at the general election. And suddenly, everything was, he took over leadership, demoted Richard, dumped a few other people as well, which was a bit sad. Had he been the leader while I was standing for London Mayor, I think there's a good chance we could have 4 or 5 more people on the Assembly, the London Assembly. We only have one, and I gave up that spot, the first choice, that to someone else, and I'm quite happy to do that. And I think that's an important point for people who listening to this, to understand that I'm not in it for any political career or anything like that. I just very, very worried about what's happening to our country.
What was it that made you at first decide to say no to the offer to become mayoral candidate?
Well, I've been running a campaign for 15 years. It's always been apolitical. And I've worked very closely with a lot of Tory backbenchers, some cracking Tory people. I mean, people like Craig McKinley, he's now the bionic lord. He's the one that lost all his limbs to sepsis. People like Robert Halfon, I could go on forever. There's about 20 MPs. People like Penny Mordaunt, for example, who I'm quite close friends with. They were very, very supportive of the fact is the motorist is still treated as a cash cow. And people forget that whilst we've had this freeze in fuel duty, we're still one of the highest taxed motorists in the world. When you think about in the USA, you can fill up the same tank for half the price. And I mean, the most expensive places above us are places like Hong Kong and Singapore. That doesn't say anything, but you go to somewhere like Venezuela, a litre of fuel is a penny.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And over here
it's
it's 140, that sort of level, 136, 137 at the moment, and 144 for diesel. And there's the other thing also. When I set it up in 2010, we had David Cameron and George Osborne running the show, and a certain Nick Clegg, he was around as well when they had the coalition. But what was going to happen at that point was we inherited, or the Tory government inherited, what's called a fuel escalator project, which effectively means that every budget, fuel duty will go up by inflation plus 1 or 2 pence. And had it not been for my campaigning, alongside the Sun, and they always like to take credit for some of the things I've done, but bless them, had it not been for my campaigning hard, pump prices would be well over £2 per litre now.
Wow.
So I'm quite proud of doing that, but I'm also subject to incredible attacks from the cyclists, because I'm, I've had death threats, and also from the Stop Oil people, because I'm a fossil fuel supporter in terms of I'm also a supporter of clean air, and I want all our environment to be improved, but you don't do it by hitting people in the pocket.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what people are calling the reform civil war. Where do you think it started? Do you think it started with the sacking of Ben Habib or the appointment of Zia Yusuf? Where do you think things started to go wrong?
Well, I know exactly where it started. I can tell you straight away that it happened when Zia Yusuf came in suddenly out of nowhere. This man came in with his £200,000 and he bought the position of chairman, and that's what he did. And Nigel Farage and I, we're friends, or we were. We're probably not now. Richard Tice and I are friends. People like David Ball, Paul Oakton, all these people, we can go back a long way. There's about 12, 13 people. Gawain Towler, who's been with both UKIP and the Brexit Party before reform, as their publicity guy. Everyone knows. You ask anyone in the Fleet Street area, they say, who's Gawain Towler? They just know him. He's great, and he's a good guy. But he was thrown out, and that person who threw him out was the new chair, which I still to this day don't understand why Nigel did it. I don't believe £200,000 was the reason. There's something else going on, and I'd love to be proven wrong. But
why do you think he was appointed?
I don't know. No one knows. No? I mean, the interesting thing, I gave up 2.5 years of my life to stand for reform in terms of the mayor, London mayor, and also as an MP. You think the new guy coming on board would have the courtesy just to pick up the phone and say, thank you for your time. We don't need you now. I would have accepted that. But I've heard nothing. Absolutely nothing. He just cast aside. I wrote to him. I emailed him. Tried to call him and say, can we meet up for a beer? I was being quite friendly. It's a bit like Rupert Lowe talking to Nigel now. He wants to, meet up for dinner, and he's offered him several times, meet up this, because they were friends.
Yeah. And
so I don't know how it's gone. It's become very toxic. That's the only thing I can say in the headquarters. And I know a lot of people there. And here's another example how I say it went really, it hurt me a lot, was on the day of the London mayoral election when I'm one of the, at the time, I think I was fourth in the polls in London. I think it went Labour, Tory, I think Lib Dem were probably then me and then the Greens, and there's lots of others after that. But on the day of the election, when I went to put my vote in for me in the ballot box in Westminster, there was no one from headquarters there from Reform.
No one to
This is a major election, standing for Reform. No one was there at all. I rang out headquarters. No one was there. I thought, okay, well, I wandered down there. Then I got this lovely phone call. I'm going to be with you. I thought, it must be a headquarters. It was Rupert Lowe.
Oh.
Rupert came down and he stood by me. We went for a coffee afterwards, and that proved to me what a good man he was.
And he was the only one?
He was the only one there. So that's the sadness in this. And the worst thing about it is, of course, I say it's the worst thing. In August of last year, I was interviewed by Dan Wootton. And this was a lot of things were coming up. And he said, where do you stand regarding Tommy Robinson? And we all know about the Tommy Robinson. I said, I don't know. I don't know him. I don't know anything about him. All I do know is I think he's been treated badly. And he's highlighted the child rape gang issue right across the country issue. And I've got nothing but respect for that.
Yeah.
And that was put out on Dan Wootton's show. Then I got about middle of December, I got a text, because I'd had several other interviews after that about Tommy Robinson, and I was learning more about him. And I was beginning to realise, what a good guy. I don't care about his background. I don't care about, his toxicity of the past. It's irrelevant. What he's done is actually, there's 100,000 children in this country, and the GB News highlighted 50 towns and cities that actually highlighted there's been child rape gangs, orchestrated, systematic rape of kids. And that made me so angry. So I was standing up for that. And I assumed Reform would back me on that. Well, I was wrong. I got this text from Richard Tice, who said, Howard, we're not happy you talking about supporting Tommy Robinson. If you continue to do so, you're going to be expelled. And I went, what? Richard, this is me you're talking to. I agree with probably 90% of all the policies of Reform, which is small state, strong borders, low taxation, and 20p cut in fuel duty, which is one of the things I put into the contract with the people manifesto thing they had. But anyway, I just could not believe this was happening. And I said, well, I spoke to Ben, because Ben Habib had been, obviously, as you alluded to earlier, he was thrown out too for no reason. He was deputy leader of the party. So was David Ball. He's kept quiet. And I give my credit to Gawain. He's kept quiet too. He's been quite loyal to Nigel. But Ben said, Howard, if I were you, I'd get out before, you are expelled. And so I did that. 3 days later, I publicly, in the middle of, I think it's about the 9th, 10th of January, I said, that's it. So I made a video on that. That went, the word isn't viral, but it did go, get around the places. And I was interviewed by loads and loads of, suddenly, people that were wanting to talk to me I've never spoken to, especially the left-wing press like The Guardian and The Independent. But I just couldn't believe what was happening, because I'm not in this for my political career. And I'm afraid I suddenly realised that, hang on a second, Reform isn't the party that they were basically saying you couldn't have freedom of speech.
Yeah, which is totally hypocritical for what their principles are supposed to be.
What you think they stand for. Yeah, exactly.
Why do you think it is? Because the whole Tommy Robinson argument, especially within Reform, has just caused nothing but divide. Why do you think it is that Farage and Tice have chosen this hill to fight on, and maybe something worse in the future? Why is it that has to be the topic where there's zero leniency?
It is really quite incredible, especially when you've got Lee Anderson, who's also saying, I want my town, my city back, I want my country back, which is based on the fact he's anti the infiltration of Islam and various other ethnic groups, which seem to be getting priority over good old, boring old Christians and British white Christians. And there's not a racist bone in my body. There's not a racist bone in any of those people. I don't think there is in Richard or Nigel. But for some reason, there's some hidden baggage. It goes back a long way with Tommy, and I don't know what it's about, because obviously Tommy was in UKIP. Only they wanted to bring him in more on that, but Nigel didn't like that. But Nigel didn't like about 8 or 9 people that in the UKIP thing, Gerald Batten and people like that. Yeah. They fell out. You can go. I can think of so many people that, unfortunately, if you don't agree with Nigel, your days are numbered. You're out. Tommy to me, a political hero. I went to see him. I went to see him on February the 4th. I spent 2 hours with him in prison, speaking to the man, and because I wanted to find out for myself, because of what was going on.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear, because I didn't know enough about him. And for 2 hours, I spoke to him, and out of that 2 hours, that 120 minutes, Tommy moved me beyond belief. For about 110 minutes, he spoke, and he is a political hero of mine now. What he's done, he didn't need to do all these things. He's in prison for a civil offence for highlighting something basically is the truth, and I just feel there's too much, and it goes right to the doors of Number 10 and the Attorney General as well, who've got for some reason destroying a man's life like this. And he's not well. He's not good. You think I think it's 141 days today
in solitary confinement.
Yeah, and so. And going back to why Nigel, I mean, you heard Richard say in an interview, I think, with Camilla Tomerley on GB News, he says, when she mentioned Tommy Robinson, says, what do you think about it? So, we had nothing to do with them, or nothing to do with that lot.
That lot, yeah.
And I simply said to Richard, I'm that lot. I'm part of that lot. And the irony is Tommy Robinson told people to vote for reform.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. So many people were saying that when Reform had referred to Tommy Robinson's lot as that lot, they lost a lot of their voting. I mean, I interviewed Tice. Tice was actually the first MP, I think, that I interviewed. And a few weeks earlier, I was at a Tommy Robinson protest. In fact, that's where Resistance GB found me. So to actually be interviewing him, all I wanted to ask was, why am I that lot? Just because I want to keep my country safe.
And did you ask that question?
No, I didn't. I had to kind of run in and out. There were a lot of people.
No, fair comment. No, fair enough.
But yeah, no, it does make you want to ask these questions, because before all of that, I was thinking, oh, Reform, here's this great party. We've been stuck between the Labour and the Conservatives, and now maybe they're going to come and change things up, and they're going to actually do what the people want. They're going to close the borders. They're going to control immigration. They're going to stop all the woke ideology and indoctrination. And then it just feels like they've lost their momentum and they've split off.
Well, they've lost their heart, and I'm afraid the party's moving more to the left. It's more centrist at the moment, and I dare I say it, no doubt you hear this, I think Nigel is only in it for his career, for his, he wants to be Prime Minister, rather than actually thinking about what matters to the grassroots supporters. I'm in touch with loads of people in the grassroots supporters, and they are crying out for honesty and truth, and they're not getting that anymore. Their ticker tape thing, which tells you how many members they've got on their website, and you remember that was a big silly thing that was brought up by, I think it was the Tory party or something like that, saying, is it accurate? And it was accurate, but it's not accurate now, because they're not actually giving information about the ones that have left.
Wow.
I think I went down 500 or something when Rupert Lowe Day. I know for a fact it's thousands have left.
But they're not being honest about it.
No, they're not being honest.
That's very sneaky. So obviously on one side of it, especially you said about Farage, he just kind of seems to be in it because he wants to be Prime Minister. It seems to be a running theme that a lot of people are now thinking that Farage thinks it's kind of a one-man show.
Yep.
And then you've got the total contrast of it with Rupert Lowe. I mean, obviously you know him personally. What is going on with everything that's going on between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage at the moment? There's allegations against him, and there's a lot of people who are obviously on social media choosing sides. Where do you stand with it, and what do you think really happened?
Well, I could say right from the beginning, I'm 100% behind Rupert Lowe. I've seen this sort of thing. I mean, when I left the party in January, Nigel brought up, and obviously someone went through my social media and various interviews I've done in the past and brought up my saying, I said to Dan Wood, I said, the trouble with at the moment of this country is we've been dominated by immigrants and immigration. That was the phrase. Nigel was interviewed by Christopher Hope with GB News and saying, oh, Howard Cox left, your friend. He said like that. Yes, well, he said a stupid thing, didn't he? A silly thing about immigration and immigrants were being dominated or ruled by it, he said. And anyway, Dan Wharton kindly sent me the tape, and he also had me on again and played it. I didn't say it like that, but they used it like that. And it's a bit like Nigel suddenly coming out blaming Tommy Robinson for things he didn't do, like abuse of women. And Tommy's ex-wife came out and said that's absolute rubbish. It never happened. All those sorts of things, and I can see that. Going back to your original question about Rupert and Nigel and what's happening between them, only they will know. But what I do know is that when someone is more popular than Nigel, he doesn't like it. And Rupert is doing a cracking job. He doesn't take a salary. All of his money goes to charities in Great Yarmouth and in that area. And he's a rich man, yes, so he can afford to do it. I mean, I knew him a little bit when he was chair of Southampton Football Club and that sort of thing. And he always says to me, because I said to him, "Are you okay? You're all right?" He said, "Well, when 30,000 people in a crowd shout out, 'Get rid of the chairman,' dump Rupert Lowe or something like that, you do get a thick skin." Yeah. But joking apart a little about that Rupert is no way any of that he's guilty of anything. If he's been accused of things in that letter that Zia and Nigel signed that went out in social media of various things that are just not true.
Well, there are things that aren't even connected to him. Am I right in thinking that there was some complaint against a small amount of women who had supposedly, there was an allegation against Farage, Lowe, and then some of the women actually came out and said, "No, this is absolutely nothing to do with Lowe whatsoever." So do you think it's just a smear campaign?
Well, yes, it's a complete smear campaign. I repeat, Rupert is working hard. I think he's asked 15 times more questions in Parliament than Nigel Farage. He's voted, I think, 3 times more in the various lobbies. He's a good man. He's standing up for the people, the grassroots people. The thing about is mass deportation and the immigrants, the illegal immigrants coming across in boats. He wants to get rid of them. Yeah. And the reason why we voted for Reform UK, because we thought they were the only party who were going to do that.
Yeah.
We're learning now that that's not going to happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, we thought that that's what Farage wanted, but I remember it was a few weeks ago. It might be just over a month ago now. He was either did an interview or he made a tweet saying that the Islamic demographic is so large now that we may as well
accept
it. And people just kind of took that as, well, hang on a minute, you were supporting mass deportations, and now all of a sudden you're saying that we've just got to roll over and accept an invasion of our country, because that's how people feel about it. Do you think that Farage has gone too far in some aspects and maybe getting a bit power hungry?
Well, there's a couple of things. There's that one, and I think that's the ultimate betrayal of the people who have he's taken money from to become members. And the other thing, of course, is Northern Ireland. You just asked Ben Habib about Northern Ireland, about the border down the sea, etc. We haven't had a proper Brexit yet, unless we get Northern Ireland totally and utterly part of the United Kingdom. At the moment, it's still seen as part of Europe. And this is the sort of thing. And Nigel should be standing up for the Northern Irish. Only Ben did that.
Yeah.
And I've got nothing but huge admiration for Ben Habib. He's got some principles. Again, he was called bitter and twisted by Nigel in various interviews. He's not. Absolutely no. He doesn't need to do this. He's a very wealthy businessman. He doesn't need to do any of this. But we just want some honesty and transparency. And I'm afraid Nigel does not exhibit any of those facets to me.
Defiance Records, bringing you the best music from the movement. Ramisa's Never Give Up and Mad Mix's You're So Right are now available as a double A side on Defiance. And Raw Milk Conspiracy are bringing the purpose back to music with their latest single, This Is England 2024, and their brilliant debut, Misinformation Whore. Plus, now out is the fantastic Ballad of a Toolmaker's Son from Trevor John, all available from Defiance Records, the Freedom label.
He did what he was told to do back then, and that's how he got the number 10.
We have yourself, Gawain Towler, Ben Habib, that have all left or been let go. It was some kind of weird circumstances where they don't really want to say what's really happened. Where do you think this is going? Is this just going to keep happening until it's just Farage and Tice? Do you think that we're going to see a new political party of all the kind of like the reform rejects making another party together?
I object to the word reject. No, I take your point though. The thing is, what's happening is my inbox is absolutely inundated with people who are reform members.
Yeah.
And ever since I've done interviews with people like Liam Tufts, Paul Thorpe, Dan Wootton, people have said they're really impressed with I'm standing for my principles and being honest about things. And I didn't ask for that. It wasn't the reason why I did that. I genuinely am that way. you're asking where is it going until, well, as I said, my inbox is inundated with people from members, particularly these branches that they're boasting about. There's 400 plus branches been set up by Zia. Well, the branch managers and the branch chairman and all those people that I talk to are not happy at all, and many of them have just resigned en masse.
Yeah.
There's several places. I think of Amber Valley is one of the first ones that did that. And to cut a long story short, there's total dissatisfaction with the leadership.
Mm.
And until that's where I was going to go with this, is you said, where do you think it's going to go? Unless Nigel actually gets rid of Zia, it's stage one. And also perhaps, and I think I'm getting more way of thinking about it, he should step down as leader. But above all, the alleged 200,000 members should be asked who should be leader.
Yep.
And they should be put a vote on that. If he's so confident that people, and he's got that messiah status with all of the people, but he's surrounding himself with sycophants. And these people worship the ground he walks on. I've seen it. Mm. And to some extent, I was willing to put up with that because I really wanted to change, because I was so fed up with the Tories, so fed up with Labour. And Labour are laughing themselves all the way to the next election at the moment. They may not get the massive majority they got now, but I still think they'll be re-elected.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing. And there needs to be another party in place, or Reform Youth need to get their act together and delivering on what they promised. Mm.
Well, knowing Farage somewhat personally, do you think that he is likely to back down at some point if things keep going the way they are?
No. His ego's the size of a planet.
Well, even if, let's say, just hypothetically, if every single voter, member, except for Tice, went out from under him, do you think he'd still be as headstrong?
Well, then he'd have no choice. I think he'd be, if he's forced to go out, he would have to, save face and deliver something back that would actually save his face. I don't think that'll happen. I think, and they're still doing great in the polls.
Yeah.
And that's nothing to do with them. It's due to the fact that the Conservatives have got a lousy leader, and they're not really holding anyone to account in the Labour Party. Labour are ruining our lives. We all know that every day. We've got a financial statement coming up from Rachel from Accounts, haven't we? In soon, and I'm still fighting to make sure that fuel duty doesn't go up. I'm promised it's not going to go up till 2026, and that'd be 16 years I've won that battle. But I don't trust them. I just don't trust any of them. We've got council tax going up when you know that Keir Starmer is telling everyone in his election, pre-election work, no way council tax will go up. Yeah. Guarantee it. No ifs, no buts, he said. It's not going up. Well, I got my bill in yesterday and mine's gone up 7%. Such is life. And guess what? You look down the list for police and precepts of all the local thing. We still got big potholes. We still got no police on the street.
Yeah.
So who's going to get on top of this? And this is the sort of thing. And to some extent, I'm hoping a little bit of optimism with Kemi Badenoch. She came out this week saying, net zero is not achievable. Well, I told them that 15 years ago. And I've got a big survey being launched in the next week, results of it. 88,000 people responded in the last 6 weeks to it, and about net zero, and also trust in politics.
Well, speaking of net zero, what do you think are the biggest threats to motorists at the moment? So obviously we've got ULEZ. Is that the biggest threat ongoing with the motorists, do you think?
It's all anti-driver policies, because people forget that drivers contribute £50 billion a year to the exchequer. Yeah. Just say that again, £1 billion a week. Whether that's in fuel duty, or whether that's in VED, vehicle excise duty, car tax, insurance premiums. We could go on forever, those sorts of things. But what is sad is they're tied with the fact that this our environment is in a bad state. We're breathing bad air. I mean, the classic pathological liar of all, Sadiq Khan, said there are 4,000 deaths and due to poor air quality. That why he hasn't been, taken. I haven't got enough money. I'd love to get a barrister and really go for him for all the lies he's doing. But only one person, allegedly, is on a death certificate for poor air quality.
One person?
Yeah, and that person, about 10, 12 years ago, had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, severe asthma, and other things, and they lived by the South Circular. So, dare I say it, don't the parents have something to do with it?
You have to do the math.
Yeah, but the point is, cars have improved. I mean, haulage vehicles, HGVs, in the last 10 years, their emissions have been reduced by 50%. So if we'd allowed and it's got rid of these draconian 2030 bans and the 2050 target for net zero, if we got rid of all that and allowed technology to dictate how or clean fuel technology evolves, if we allowed that to happen, just imagine what would happen. And people have more money in their pocket, because all we're going to see now is, I reckon this country is heading for bankruptcy if they carry on the net zero way.
Well, do you think that do you think that these are all things that tie into a wider agenda? I mean, everyone's worried about things like 15-minute cities. I mean, you could just go out in London, you can't see anything but buildings everywhere. It's getting quite dystopian. Absolutely.
I mean, it's scary. When you go into World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, we can go everywhere. Mm-hmm. Our whole lives are going to be dictated to. And I'm at the tender age of 70 years of age, and I'm glad I'm 70, because I feel sorry for people being born into what's kind of coming around the corner. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to get worse. Thank heavens for Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and JD Vance. I always get this wrong. Those people are our only hope for the rest. If you imagine if Biden was re-elected, it would be terrible beyond belief. And yes, we've got problems with Putin and obviously in the Ukraine, what's going on there. And some of the things I don't agree with Donald Trump, but we have to get into some state of recognition that net zero shouldn't dominate our lives, our fight for that. All that's going to do is cripple people's lives. And one of the I spend a lot of money with the Centre of Economic and Business Research in a analytical report to ask what was the cost of the 2030 ban on new diesel and petrol car sales. What would that mean to the economy and people? Well, would you believe the costs are 5 times more than the benefits?
Really?
Now, if I came to you, you're a minister, I'm a junior little, civil servant company. I've got this great idea. Let's ban all diesel and petrol car sales. So what's happening? He said, oh, don't worry about it. It's only going to cost 5 times more than what we benefit from. You'd say, get out.
Yeah. Well, you can't take that seriously.
No, we can't. And, we got this situation where Boris Johnson is a lot to blame, I'm afraid, who I was a fan of, and I know him. He actually introduced this ban. It was 2040. Then he woke up one morning and said, oh, let's make it 2035. Yeah. And then brought it to 2030, when he was still with that 80-seat majority. And I couldn't believe it, and what he was doing. And of course, he's famous for the Boris spikes, which ruined the whole of London. That situation, is not based. I mean, and we go back to Theresa May with net zero. She actually introduced it. Well, I think it took about 90 minutes in terms of actually debate in Parliament. And suddenly this thing is dominating our lives, when we're only responsible for 1% of the emissions worldwide. These are the sorts of things. And us and the US have reduced our emissions, our carbon emissions, more than anyone else in the world. But guess what? China's rocketing in terms of emissions. So is India. So is much of South America. All these places. And I just get sick to death of the fact that these things are forced upon us. And I'm afraid, unless we have an honest political party in place, and I hope, I think there are something happening soon with concrete policies about the way a party should be run, and also what they're actually delivering. We need common sense, honest policies, and the right people in place who will stick to those policies. If we get that, I'm optimistic.
Well, do you think that we should have a law in place that stops parties from breaking their mandate?
Yeah, I go even further. I put them in prison. They put Tommy Robinson for telling the truth. So why the hell can't we do it? I mean, there's two pathological liars that are in very important positions. One is our Prime Minister and one is our Mayor of London. Those two, both Labour, and how they can get away with what they do. I've never heard actually Keir Starmer actually answer a question.
No, it's always something. I think he's got too used to being in opposition for all them years. He hasn't actually prepared anything.
Well, he's a barrister. He should be. I mean, he must have a brain. But to me, he's one big amoeba. He's got one cell up there. And from my point of view, he is the major problem we've got, followed very closely by even bigger major problem is Ed Miliband.
Yeah, well, not a lot of people like him. He's very, very much not popular. Bringing it back to Fairfuel UK.
Yeah.
What was the first inspiration for you to set that up?
It's not an inspiration. It was a shocking recognition. I was doing some management consultancy for various small business enterprises, companies that had about 40 or 50 people, that sort of thing, not turning huge amounts, but they are the salt of the earth. In fact, they're the heart of our economy. One of them was a big logistics firm, a tracking company, had 50 drivers, and they drive HGV vehicles, 40-ton vehicles that do 5, 6, 7 miles to the gallon. You imagine filling one of those up. Anyway, I was sitting having a cup of tea with him at MD one day, and he had on his table, he had his accounts, and there was a spreadsheet in front of him. And I'm very good at looking upside down. I used to be in the pharmaceutical world and used to be a medical rep and looking at doctors on the other side. But I said, "Is this true?" And he said, "What's that, Howard?" I said, "There's a line here for your fuel costs, and I know your turnover. It's a quick calculation. That's 43% of your turnover are fuel costs." He said, "Yeah, so nearly half."
43%?
Yeah. He said, "Yeah." And at that point, I did some research. 70% of that 43% went to the government in tax. So that I thought someone must be campaigning for this. So I thought must be the AA, the RAC, the Road Haulage Association, or the Freight Transport Association, which is now called Logistics UK. I went to see them, and I managed to get them to put some money into a campaign, and that's how we gave Fairfield UK. I didn't do it because I really wanted to do it. I've not made a penny out of Fairfield UK. If anything, I've put nearly £100,000 of my own money into running it when it was going through a bad time.
It's very admirable.
Yeah, I'm just passionate about the fact is I don't understand why motorists is always treated as a cash cow, especially when you talk to just up the road from where I live, this little old lady. She's got a little small Fiesta, which is about, well, she doesn't live in London, so she's not subject to ULEZ, but she wouldn't be allowed to use it. But it's about 18, 19 years old. It still works. It's a diesel. Does about 60 to the gallon. She only uses it about 100 miles a month and that sort of thing. And she uses that 100 miles a month to go to the doctors to take chemotherapy.
Oh,
she couldn't get there by bus because, see, this is the issue with a lot of the urban-based policies. It's exactly that. But people make the decisions, live in towns and city where there's great transport.
Yeah.
But 80% of people who drive live outside London.
Well, yeah, I've often said that if I lived in London, I probably wouldn't even bother getting my licence. I mean, with the amount of tubes and the congestion, oh, no, it just doesn't seem worth it.
Well, on the way to this interview, I was brought by a taxi driver who recognised me, which is quite nice. I said, "How are you? What are you thinking?" He said, "I'm thinking of chucking it in. I've been doing it for 40 years, but I can't cope anymore with the congestion. Cyclists going through red lights, all the other things, the ULEZ, the congestion charges. They're not particularly hit by those things because they're exempt from those charges. But low traffic neighbourhoods where they can't go down little streets because that's a domain for rich people to be free of cars and that sort of thing." And I was talking to an Uber driver about it. He said to me, "I get very worried for people. I drop off young ladies who've come out for a good night out, 2:00 in the morning from a nightclub, but I can't take them down their street because it's a low traffic neighbourhood. I'm not allowed to go down there. So they have to walk 2:00 in the morning." Those are the sort of stupid things. And I always say this, that someone got up in the morning, whether it's a civil servant or some special advisor, SPADs or whatever you want to call them, and put these policies into place. And no one's been allowed to fight them. That's why I do what I do.
So with the ULEZ charge, I mean, I remember I wrote a paper on this for my uni. It was one of the ones that I got a lowest mark on, funnily enough. If Rishi Sunak and the likes similar are so hell-bent on us all having electric cars and everything, why can't the funds from ULEZ collected, instead of going to Transport for London, because I mean, let's be honest, when was the last time they updated the tubes? They're not nice and they're not clean, definitely. Why can that money not be redirected into making manufacturing deals with electric car dealerships to make them more affordable for the average person? Do you think that that's just because they don't want to do that, or is that actually not a possibility?
Well, again, on that poll that I'm coming out in the next 2 weeks, we asked these 88,000, what do you think you'll be driving in 2030? I'm not revealing it yet, but it'd be no surprise what it is. The point is, electric vehicles are great. The technology is phenomenal. 1, is expensive. 2, they're very heavy. And 3, guess what? They're charged by a network on the grid that is basically generated from fossil fuels. Everything is wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I drive a hybrid car. I drive half electric, and I love it when I go into town, except for paying the various charges, the congestion charge. But when I come into London, I drive up from Kent. Anything below 20 mile an hour, my car reverts to electric.
Really?
It's fantastic.
That's pretty cool.
It is cool. And it is, and I'm getting sort of 45 miles to the gallon overall, and I'm very proud of it. It's a Lexus. I've had 3 hybrids, so I'm not anti a clean vehicle and using electric vehicles. So I'm going to make that clear to your listeners. I'm not a complete, but the point is, there are 37 million drivers in this country, of which 35 million drive a diesel or a petrol, and they're happy with it. Yeah. They're fantastic, no problem. And can you imagine the commercial world all moving, like the trucks, HGV trucks move to, well, they'd have to have a truck the size of the for carry the battery, on the back, the side on the back. The thing is, and the big problem we have is these anti-driver policies. They are seen to be the pariah. They seem to be the devil incarnate, because there's something coming out of your exhaust that looks like it's dangerous. Even though, as I said earlier, that the HGVs particularly, emissions have fallen by 50% in the last 10 years. And if they'd incentivise manufacturers instead of penalising if they don't produce many EVs, you've got that thing hanging over. I mean, Nissan's going to go bust.
Yeah.
Because all those sorts of things. This is all a political decision. It's not been asked, and all of the things that they're trying to say, and I said the costs are 5 times the benefits, this 2030 ban, they're not going to generate anything to the economy. And the average household by 2050, if they adopt the 2030 ban, all the way to 2050, will cost £14,000 a year.
It's not a good outlook.
I just don't get it.
No, I don't think anyone does.
But I'm afraid, they sit there. I mean, this is the problem. I had this when I was been campaigning every year on fuel duty. I delivered petitions and signatures to Number 10 and to the Treasury. I get people to, produce, economic groups like the CEBR to produce reports, objective reports. It costs jobs, rising inflation. I mean, petrol going up, diesel goes up. The first thing you hear on the news when there's inflation, that's because pump prices went up.
Yeah.
You hear that. That's usually the next phrase, isn't it? Oh, it's come down now because pump prices didn't go up. These are the sorts of things. It's intrinsically linked in all of our lives and our society. Transport. The transport costs should be as low as possible. And if we could get them as low as possible, and I mean significantly lower than possible, you watch our GDP rocket.
So what, I was actually going to ask you, what have been the biggest achievements of Fair Fuel UK so far?
Well, the biggest thing I'm very proud of is the fact that we have had that freeze in fuel duty since 2010. In fact, it's 10% less because thank you. And I'll give Rishi Sunak his due, because he met with me and I said to him, go on, I challenge you to do something with it. And he said, watch this space, Howard. But equally, they've got departments who, when they produce for a budget in the Treasury, the first thing they do on the list is how much more can we get out of the motorist? That's the question. I've seen it on an agenda. How much more can we get out of the motorist? How much more can we squeeze?
Unfairly.
Yeah, exactly. So my biggest achievement is that, and I've got a lot of people have a lot of respect for me for that, and I'm proud of doing that. But I'll never be made a knighthood or a lord or like that, because I'm sorry, I've done it for fossil fuels, and the fossil fuels is almost like a 4-letter swear word. Not as you know, but you see my point. I'm not the flavour of the month. If I was saving, hedgehogs on the M4, I'd probably be knighted. But the fact I've saved the economy £200 billion of tax increases,
won't get
that
a look.
Doesn't count. I'm not after that, by the way. I'm making the point. That's
No,
how the government sees.
Yeah. And listening to it as someone who's just, average citizen at home watching this on their TV, that is something very respectable. And these are the types of people such as yourself that people want to see in knighthoods and in mayoral candidate positions. This is the kind of thing that people want to see. Where can people find you, find Fair Fuel UK, current campaigns, future campaigns, and support you guys?
Well, I'm continuing to work with a lot of guys now, actually, because I still passionately care about what Reform UK stands for. So there's some exciting things coming up soon, which you'll probably be reporting on. But there's a thing called the GB PAC. I'm working closely with Ben Habib on that one. And I think there's something that actually it's called Reform Magna Carta. Yeah. I don't know anything about these things yet. All I know is that they give me some optimism. And to find me is the best thing to do is I'd love you to sign up. It's for free, people, fairfueluk.com. Do that, get on there. You can even buy a sticker. That helps with the campaign.
Well, I'm definitely going to buy a few stickers. Thank you so much for coming on, and it was lovely seeing you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. For more more exclusive behind-the-scenes content, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon. It really helps us cover the cost of any live streams, events, protests, or anything that we do. You'll also be seeing any behind-the-scenes footage and anything that we might be doing with Defiance Records.
Resistance GB's new series, 1,000 Words, has me, portrait artist Jake Fern, talking to some of the key figures in the movement. Half my brain concentrating on having a conversation, and the other half on making a painting. Do I succeed at either? You be the judge.